What is going on with Derby County? Are they on the brink of going into the same routes as Bury and Macclesfield, out of business completely and liquidated? I'm not going to be able to answer all of those questions, unfortunately, but the best thing I can do is give my reaction and give my thoughts and my personal judgment on the current situation of Derby County, which just seems to be an everlasting roller coaster ride that just never seems to end. You go up to the peaks of one optimistic situation with Kirchner, for instance, buying the club by it seems, and then all of a sudden, bang, you go straight back down to rock bottom again when a deadline is missed by the administrators, which have come under fire recently, and then all of a sudden it looks like we're back to square one again. And they can't keep doing this. I'm just going to say my thoughts in terms of what has led them there. I'm thinking of doing a football tales to this as well. If you guys want to see that, if you get this video to 20 likes, I will do a football tales on Derby County, because I've already done some research on Derby's history and they've been in a very similar situation like this before, which I think will be very interesting if I cover that and we draw some parallels there. But for today, I'm just going to talk to you about the recent events, what Derby are looking like that they're going to have to deal with so far, and the likelihood of them surviving next year, which is absolutely crazy for me to think about. But without any further ado, let's try and debunk what the hell has been going on with Derby County. The first thing I'm going to be looking at is the official statement released by the EFL. So the EFL has today confirmed, well, this was actually a couple of days ago when this statement was out, the administrators at Derby County, that following the failure of Mr. Chris Kirchner, which I talked about in the intro, to conclude the sale of the club, it is changing the terms of the suspended notice of withdrawal issued when the club entered into administration in September 2021. It talks on saying that the league is increasingly concerned that the ongoing delays in the sale process are now presenting a real risk of the integrity of the next season's competition. So how many times have we seen the word integrity of competition with EFL? They really do take that seriously. It wasn't integral enough to keep Bury though. With a 22-23 fixture list due to be released in less than 2 weeks, they need to act now in the best interest of the EFL. Sounding a little bit selfish there. But the suspension of the notice of the withdrawal of a club's shares in the EFL is subject to conditions that, in accordance with the league's insolvency policy, the EFL board determined, and given a lack of progress by the administrators to finalise the transaction, it now considers it appropriate to revise the conditions of the suspension. So what they talk about here is a little bit later on says, as a result, the EFL has informed the administration that there will be a revision to the condition there, and the EFL is now made a party to all correspondence and discussions between the administrators and any and all potential bidders, with the acknowledgement that the league will be able to negotiate directly in relation to matters concerning the transfer of share in the EFL. Now then, what that means is the EFL are really stepping in now, and they're really having like no nonsense here. They really want this done now. They're really doing what they can, almost like throwing eggs in one basket now, really, to get Derby back to where they should be, you know, that they can be financially safe in the next coming season. Now, if this does not work when the fixture lists are out and then we're really close to the opening day of the season, that is when things will start getting really messy for Derby County. I'm already saying right now, their next season is completely screwed. It's completely screwed, and I'll explain why in a minute. But right now, what I will just slightly praise the EFL for, because they've been really criticised, you know, with their treatment of clubs in recent years, Macclesfield and Bury being two of them there. They sound like that they really do want Derby to get out of this, for the fact that they are actually stepping in themselves. And the fact that accountant there, I think it was Trevor Birch, yeah, following the sale of the setback of the club and its fans, it's vitally important that the sale of the club is concluded at the earliest opportunity. He's a chartered accountant within the EFL, Trevor Birch, so he would definitely have the know-how to make sure that the process of the club being purchased is, you know, done to the smoothest of actions there. Now, the thing is with that, just once again, I think a lot of people are going to moan about the consistency. And, you know, it sounds really bad for me to say that, but unfortunately, we cannot change the past. We cannot get Bury back, for instance. Bury are already trying to climb back into the leagues. Macclesfield are still folded. You know, it's still yet to hear from them. We cannot get those clubs back, unfortunately. People are really going to be going in on the EFL with the changing of treatment, especially with the likes of how much they helped Wigan, and of course more extended deadlines to get Derby purchased. But in the end of it, it's once again, and it's a common two words, best interests, unfortunately. And what I will say with Bury and Macclesfield, that's an example of things that can go wrong with a lack of preparation and help. And I think the EFL are aware of that. I think the EFL still to this day are wounded by how those two clubs are out of business now. I mean, Macclesfield technically weren't in the EFL when they got folded, but they were a member of the EFL, you know, within years before they got completely dissolved. Now, one thing I'm going to look into a little bit is just to explain, you know, why the deductions, because it was something that I touched upon, but it wasn't something that I go into much detail with. But it does actually very loosely connect the difficulty of trying to purchase Derby County. One of the big ones here is when they got their 9-point deduction on the sale of Pride Park and the amortisation of players. So, when you amortise players, it really accounts differently. You need to depreciate the value of your players, but when you amortise players, it's slightly different. It takes more variables into account, like player age. The thing is with that, if they're going to mess around with that business, you know, let's say someone highly valued got a really bad injury last year, unfortunately their value is going to drop down from what, you know, they probably should have received, you know, in the value of when they did purchase this player in. And sometimes the clubs try and manipulate that to minimise losses. And another thing there, which I think was something I had to read quite recently, was the sale of Pride Park, because this was a thing going around all of our heads thinking, okay, why is this so difficult? We had the claims of Wickham and Middlesbrough making things difficult for administrators, Quantuma, to get a preferred bidder in. But the other was the sale of Pride Park, and what has actually happened here is actually quite serious. So basically, Derby were going to have a tax loss, pretty much. So as you can see here, the charge relates up to losses in 3 years up to June 2018, despite the club posting the pre-tax loss profit of 14.6. Now, the rule is, spending rules allow charity clubs to lose 39 million over a 3-year period. Now, it is actually very unusual to get a profit. If you can see here, between July the 1st, 2017 and 30th of June 2018, Derby recorded a pre-tax profit for the first time in 10 years. That is incredible. But there is a way that Mel Morris managed to make that. And one thing that really happened, if I can find it, is this here. Profit of 14.6 million. It was sold to Mel Morris for £80 million. So basically, they've sold it, getting the money from that stadium, but then no one else has purchased it. What Morris has done, he's leased the stadium back. When you lease an asset or an item in any case, you are making a commitment to purchase this item for a number of years. And when you lease it, you only have to make payments subsequently, annually, mostly. Sometimes it could be quarterly or seasonally, but mostly it's annually. And the problem with that is that what that has done, it has actually boosted the tax loss up. And when you think about it here, the amount they spent in that season, June 2018, and this would have been in or around the time when Morris was really gambling on the future of this club, spending hefty transfer prices. You know, I looked not so long ago about how expensive a lot of these players were, likes of Jack Marriott and Waghorn going in, combined I think for around 30 million, and they both left for free. All of it was completely mismanaged and really dodgy in terms of the management of Morris there. Now, the thing is, I do see Morris as a successful businessman, but as a football man, clueless. And that is the big part of this video for me. If you have no clue in running a football club and you've not, at least observed, close investors or owners managing or owning clubs, you shouldn't try and do it yourself. And I think Mel Morris really, really undermined the difficulty it is to manage finances in a football club. It is a sport that has got huge variables. When you manage a business in general, there's so many things that can affect the sale and the value of a business. But with football, they've got, I'd say, 10 times as many variables that can change the value of a club than normal business would. I mean, I hate to use the word normal, but unfortunate thing is, I just don't think Mel Morris considered the consequences of doing that. What he did ultimately, Mel Morris, was to basically prevent this from happening. So, the pre-tax period of £39 million, basically, if you go over that, you could get up to a 21-point deduction. And this was something that Sheffield Wednesday had very similarly there. So, if you see somewhere here, the Owls saw their ground for 60 million, reaching a pre-tax profit of 2.5 mil. Now, in that time, Sheffield Wednesday obviously spent quite a bit of money, and they had the likes, I think they had Carvajal as their manager at the time, and they fell just short of getting promoted. That playoff final when they lost out, they didn't get 150 million. And I think it was Hull that they played at that time. And then obviously later on, they had Huddersfield when they lost out in the semi-final, I think within the next season. They lost out in that money, 2 opportunities as well. And unfortunately, if they're going to try and cover up their tax losses by selling to the ground, the EFL are not going to like that. They're going to be very, very suspicious with that. And what happened in the end is that they got their 12-point deduction. It was reduced to 6 points in the end, but ultimately that deduction made the Owls go down. Without that points deduction, Sheffield Wednesday would still be a championship club, at least in last season at least. So it is really, really shocking to me that we're seeing this so often. Reading had something similar, a couple of years ago. Aston Villa were accused of it when they were in the Championship as well. But the big, big dropper is this. Derby County officially enter administration and are deducted 12 points, and that's including the 9 points they got from the previous point I talked about with the sale of the stadium. So, Mel Morris was still owner at that time, and he was in charge of getting the administrators in, and he ultimately went with Contuma, Andrew Hosking, Carl Jackson, and Andrew Miku, the managing directors at business advisory firm Quantuma. This is ironically, something that an industry that I'm about to start working in as well, and I can already see that this is going to be a really, really tough business for me to start working in at least. But what I would say here, observing what's been going on, the administrators have been given one job really. They really need to act in the best interest of the creditors, pretty much. And the unfortunate part of it is administration in previous seasons has just not been smooth at all. I think back to Wigan's one where there were so many push deadlines and ultimately nearly killed the club. They were within days of them dissolving entirely. And Derby could really get into that way as well if they are not careful. One thing, I don't think the administrators are shining a great light on themselves. I think the continuous push deadlines and the continuous delays is making things very, very difficult. And, well, especially for the EFL. The EFL are ultimately really drumming their fingers right now, trying to see if they can tick Derby off being an official EFL team. And ultimately, what has happened there, just a lot of miscommunication. And there has been controversy as well with their actions towards Mike Ashley's bid. I don't know whether it's down to Mike Ashley's actions or his previous actions in a way with Newcastle. I don't know if that's an agenda thing. But if not, then unfortunately, Quantuma have just not been transparent enough. But understandably, it is very difficult to actually be transparent. You've got to protect the financial exposure of whatever company you're working at. So they want to tell, but they can't. It's against the law to do so. And I think a lot of people don't know that. The fans expect to know absolutely everything. The only thing that they will be able to get a good bit of evidence of knowing how it's going is from, I think, the MPs working at Derby, Derby Group, I think that's what they're calling it. And unfortunately right now, I think the difficulty is the lack of progress. The one good progress is getting rid of the claims. Mel Morris, to be fair, has actually stepped out of his way and has managed to pay Steve Gibson. But ultimately, so many things have really not helped the takeover. And it's gotten to this stage now where they're in limbo. So I wouldn't say Steve Gibson is ultimately to blame, but he's got a very small factor in Derby being so desperate to get taken over now. Those things ultimately didn't really make Derby an appropriate or an attractive club for many investors to try and get. And the sale of the club, as I said, the difficulty in getting that off Mel Morris is also going to be difficult as well, especially with the amount that was sold to him as well. It's a ridiculous amount of money there. So at this moment of time, you've got to have really deep pockets. The only positive thing is that there's clearly a lot of people interested. Chris Kirchner looked like he was going to be in the knight in shining armour for Derby County, was actually pretty transparent, especially in the beginning part of him trying to take over Derby, informing fans that things will be okay. Unfortunately, at this moment of time, it looks like that he's missed the deadline for Quantuma. That's what the EFL were talking about there and why they're frustrated with Quantuma, especially there. Basically, Kirchner not being able to prove the financial evidence for it. So, lack of communication again with Quantuma and why they've approached Kirchner. It's been something I've been watching Second Tier Podcast do, actually, for the fact that it just doesn't look like that he has got, with his track record, the funds to even do and, own a football club. It's ridiculous, really. And it just seems quite erratic, the whole thing. It's desperate. And unfortunately, right now, as I keep reiterating, it's put the club in serious limbo. And it's really, really scary, actually. And you know what? I'm actually going to say something about with the Second Tier Podcast, because they've been under absolute scrutiny recently with their coverage of Derby County. I don't want to make this too long and I don't want to make this a rant. But a lot of people are really unhappy with it, and I'm sorry, but they're Derby County fans, and honestly, I'm looking at the coverage, and I actually say it's quite interesting, with me going into a business advisory role quite soon. It is quite eye-opening about, the disconnect, you would almost say, with the two businesses and the two industries. And if you are not going to like what they talk about with Derby, just don't watch it. For crying out loud. I've been sick to the death, with the amount of tweets that I see going back and forth with people attacking the Second Tier Podcast for this. So I want to draw the line there. If they cannot talk about the team that they support, then, you have no right to even try and comment for what they should talk about. By default, they should be allowed to talk about their club. So, yes, let's just end it on that. But I don't want this video to go on a tangent there, because right now it is going that way. I think one thing that I'm going to also look at is the recent news, and this is why I'm saying that they've been screwed for this year. They've only got 5 contracted players for what I'm aware of. Liam Rosenior, their assistant manager, is heavily linked with Blackpool, and considering Blackpool is going to be a very attractive club, for a young manager, and for the fact that, I don't think they're going to have to pay Derby too much, with the administrators doing what they can to make Derby an attractive club as possible. Rosenior is going to easily jump ship to that. It's just not looking good at all. There's even down to Wayne Rooney's feature. If Wayne Rooney leaves, then I don't know where Derby's going to go. I really, really don't know, to be honest. Now, the thing is, I'm really, really scared for them there. But, look at this here. Mike Ashley saying that he wants Rooney. So, it is interesting to me that Quantuma have been really, really against Ashley, with him clearly speaking out that he really, really wants this there. And Quantuma recently have really attacked the media on what has really, pulled them out and what has made them out to be. Unfortunately, if they continuously been pushing deadlines like this with lack of explanation for it, people are going to question. It's what's happened is when you've got the big responsibility of trying to get a very popular football club out of trouble. So that's something I felt they should have really been prepared for. I mean, right now, what I feel with the own situation here, if it does not get resolved in the next couple of weeks, I'd be very scared. I would be scared. The positive thing is that I can't remember who the previous one was. There was 3 other consortiums with competing with My Ashley to buy the club. One of them cannot no longer actually compete to buy Derby following their investors moving into other projects, so they don't have the financial power to back them now. One of them is trying to get their investors back, and they're thinking about going again. And Mike Ashley has stayed there throughout. And I'm not saying Mike Ashley's going to, be the most attractive, owner, but what he will do to Derby, he'll keep them afloat. And honestly, Derby are in this desperate situation that they're going to want Mike Ashley. He's been absolutely scrutinised with his treatment of Newcastle. But right now, Derby County, for the financial turmoil they're in, they'll take Mike Ashley in open arms. Now, in terms of what I think will happen, I can't predict what will happen, and I hate to predict what will happen as well. And I'm always technically quite pessimistic when there's a significant lack of progress for the fact that Derby had spent all this time looking like that they were going to get it, and now they're back to where they were within 2, 3, 4 months ago. And for the fact now that they're in this position where they've not even got a starting 11 to field now that are under contracts, not even including the youth players there, manager staff that could start leaving too. Right now, what this has done now, even if they do get purchased, whether it's Ashley or one of the other consortiums, they're going to have little to no time to fix this squad. So I do fear for Derby in League One. Had Kirchner purchased the club, then I'd be a little bit more optimistic about their chances. So, that is my opinion. I mean, it's not really saying what I think whether Derby will survive, because I don't really want to predict those sorts of things. I make predictions, but I hate predicting over the future of what could be, a vocal point for many, many people's lives, in around Derbyshire. And it is really upsetting, really. One thing that would be a little bit positive though is that Derby have been in this position before, and they have been able to get out of it recently. I'm not going to really go on too much detail about it, because if I do a Football Tales, I'll explain it more. But in 1984 they also had financial trouble, and if you remember that their chairman at that time was Stuart Webb, and he was very vocal on Mel Morris's actions. He actually said, we all work together to keep it going, but at this point, it looks like it comes to the end. So it's not really exciting for the fact that Stuart Webb, with that really scarring experience, is saying quotes like that. So I really do hope for Derby's sake they'll be okay. But I think the moment of truth will be revealed within the next month or so. So, the clock is ticking for Derby. Will they get an owner in? I can only cross everything. I'm going to do double fingers crossed there to see if Derby will survive. I don't even support Derby, but I was deeply saddened. I watched Sky Sports Live when Bury were announced that they were going to be completely expelled. And I still remember this to this day, the reaction from the fans. My thoughts of when I watched it. There's only 2 moments that I've watched from Sky Sports that have really left, a bitter pill for me and a lot of anger and frustration. That was the Super League announcement, and it was Bury's expulsion from the Football League. And it cannot repeat again. Bolton were in this close. Wigan were this close of going out as well. We cannot afford this. And for the fact that there are other clubs right now that look like they could be taken over by controversial owners as well. Birmingham. There's something needs to be done with the fit and proper persons test. We cannot put these clubs in financial risk with the pandemic that has cost so much sacrifice to businesses all around the world. Right now, it is doing its evil job and is trying to take other businesses away from a lot of people's lives, and that's not fair, especially with clubs like Derby, with that amount of history that they've got. It shouldn't be gambled like that. So that is my response to Derby's situation done. If you guys like what you see, please give the video a like. It just to help the channel. Please do hit the subscribe button, and please share the channel too. All of that helps too. That wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for watching. You guys are legendary for this video. As always, I'll see you guys soon. Take care everyone, and pray for Derby.